Hello, everybody who is joining us. I'll just start at the beginning, introducing this talk, grant strategies for uncertain times. So I've had my own ups and downs with what has been going on and have felt a lot of moments of just like wanting to curl in bed and just like wait until all of this stuff passes. And the thing is, what I have realized repeatedly every time I get into that mode is that first, we don't know how quickly this will pass. And second, it's just not a strategy to get through. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, like how I've been thinking about how to get through these difficult times. And so one of the things that I realized is that I'm probably not the only one who's who's feeling that way and wanted to share really some thinking about where reviewers and funders might be at right now and how you can do your best to work within that and not to unintentionally trigger stuff that you don't want to trigger. And then I do have a little bit of bonus for you about what's working in AI right now. We've developed a strategy that we're using with our clients that is pretty exciting. We actually developed it a few months back, but it continues to work great. And I haven't had a chance to share it with anybody. So maybe I'll do a separate talk that goes into more detail, but I'll give you at least some details so that you could start getting some ideas from what we've been doing. All right, so let's dive in. If you haven't yet seen this question and posted your answer in the chat, in the messages, I invite you to do that, to just share how you're feeling. So not only so that I can see that when we come back to that in a bit, but also so that you can share that your colleagues can feel this sense of solidarity. Like we really are all in this together. And that's one thing I'm going to talk about that has changed. All right, so the setup, I probably don't need to belabor this, but I'm just going to briefly talk about this, that things are highly unusual. These are not normal times. I've been basically present in research since I was a small kid. What do I mean by that? Well, my father was a chemistry professor, and I used to go in and hang out in the office when he was working at the university, and we would have visitors, postdocs, and students from all over the world visiting regularly. And my father talked a lot about his work and worked a lot at home when he was, working at home and working in the office, whatever. So I've been around academic research since I was a kid. What's going on now is unprecedented. I know that's a very overused word right now. This is unprecedented. You don't need another person telling you that. But the thing is, when things are unprecedented, it throws us into confusion. Our subconscious minds are wired to do things by habit. And when things change so much and so rapidly as they've been changing, it throws us into disarray. It automatically puts us into anxiety. And I think that's actually part of the intention, that is what some people are trying to cause right now, is they are trying to cause anxiety and fear and doubt, and they are trying to cause people they don't like to shut down and withdraw. And I think actually playing into that is one of the worst things that we can actually do right now, is to play into that and to really shut down and to give up on things. I'm not saying it's it's not going to be tough, but I don't think giving up is really a good option. And as a result of all this, funders are in chaos, as you all know. Reviewers are probably more wary than ever, and applicants are hesitant, which I think you've shared some of in the chat already. So my first and perhaps most important message for you is don't give up. I mean, if you really have been thinking for a while about an alternative career or an alternative path, I'm not saying that you shouldn't now really consider that. Like if you think something else would truly make you be happier in life than doing your research, then now is a very good time to consider that. And we discussed a little bit of that on a previous webinar I did, about the idea of a pivot and how do you decide to do that. And we have support systems for that too. But in any case, if if you are still excited and interested in doing research, if that's what you feel you are drawn towards, now is not the time to give up, because the people who will be left standing at the end of all of this are the people who just don't give up. There is hope, and really, they do want you demoralized. And so, in terms of this don't give up, I'm showing a picture of a river that I have run. This particular rapid, I'm showing my friend. This is a picture I took of my friend going through this rapid. This is what's called a class 4 rapid that you're seeing here. That class 4 means for advanced kayakers. And I've also boated class 5 rapids. I just didn't have a good picture that I could throw together at the last minute or put in here at the last minute, but class 5 rapids. Class 5 rapids are the most difficult rapids that you can do in a kayak and still have a chance of surviving, a reasonable chance of surviving. And so I've done class 5. And recently I realized right now we scientists and those associated with scientists and research, we are in the midst of a class 5 rapid. These are very difficult times. There are many obstacles. And one of the reasons I like the kayaking analogy here is that in kayaking, you never know exactly what's going to happen. You can take exactly the same paddle strokes down the river running a rapid the second time as you did the first time, and something completely different can happen because the water is unpredictable. It's always churning and waves are coming up and going back and things are, chaotic. And sometimes you're going through the middle of a rapid and you suddenly get a headwind that throws you off course. I mean, all sorts of stuff can happen. It is unpredictable. And so when psychologically, when I go into a difficult rapid, let's say a class 5 rapid, I know a couple things. I know that it's not going to necessarily go as I would like it to go, that I might get thrown off course. I might get flipped over and have to roll up. I might get tossed over to a place that I really don't want to be and have to deal with somehow getting out of there. And it has happened to me many times. So, how do I get through? Well, the number one key to getting through that difficulty is to not hesitate, to not waffle, to not waver. Because if you go into a rapid like this with what I'm showing on the screen and you have hesitation, you have doubt, you start trying to paddle upstream or paddle over to the side to grab onto a rock to just, stare down at the rapid and be afraid, and you let that fear grow and dominate your thinking in that rapid, you are actually much, much less likely to make it through unscathed. I have done some things that I would not do now in whitewater kayaking, and really risking my life in a big way, like scary, scary ways. And the way I got through was just like, okay, I'm doing this, and once I start into it, really just focusing, putting all my energy, commitment, conviction into doing it, whatever happens, even if something completely unexpected happens, just dealing with it and getting back on track as soon as I can. This is the attitude we all need right now. This is the mindset that will help you get through this situation. And make no doubt about it, this is a difficult rapid we are going through, and it's not just one short rapid, it's long and ongoing. It's like a marathon, class 4 or class 5 rapid that we're dealing with here. So that mindset is going to be essential. And I think if you adopt that mindset, you will find that you are surprisingly resilient. I think most of us are more resilient than we think of ourselves as being. So in order to help you with that, that's what this talk is really about, is understanding where you're at and where your reviewer is at, so you can make the most of this situation and reconcile any differences in your grant proposals. So that's what I'm going to focus in on. But again, number one message, like, get that mindset of like, okay, I'm in the rapid, I'm going for it and I'm going to make this work because I have to. I have no other choice. And that's how it feels when you're in the middle of the rapid. You have no other choice except for forward to get through it. So let's talk about some possible emotions that your reviewer may feel. Now, I apologize for the dense slides. Like I like to talk about presenting, simple, clear presentations, but I just did not have time to follow even my own rules about that. So I overloaded this with bullets, and I'll just try to do my best to keep us focused. Um, so your reviewer may feel some of these emotions: resentful about this current situation, like resentful and even angry. They may feel frustrated at the impediments to science, both their own and other people's science, and in general, frustrated by that. Unclear about the future. We had several people who were commenting in the chat who are very unclear about the future, and that's quite understandable because none of us knows what's going to happen next week, next month. It's rapidly changing. And I think there's, as a result, a lot of this anxiety more than ever. I mean, even before all of this stuff started happening, I think anxiety levels were pretty high, but now it's like boosted to a whole new order of magnitude of anxiety. And as a result, just really unstable and ungrounded. And I think a lot of people are secretly very angry. And what I mean by secretly is that, when it comes to asking our federal government for grants, you don't want to come across as overtly angry. So I think people are going to hide that in that context. But I mean, if you're like me, yes, I am actually very damn angry. I was about to use a much stronger French word, very angry at, at some of what's been going on. And as a result of that anger, also feeling rebellious, but not, I think many people not feeling rebellious enough that they're going to be overt about it. Because, if you're overt about being rebellious in this context, we are living in times where, they will just yank your grant. Oh, we don't like you. We don't like your grants. We don't like your funding. Oh, well, we're just going to yank this away. And it seems like that should be highly illegal to have that happen, but we are in very unusual times. So, but I still think there is this deeper sense of rebellion that probably a lot of people are feeling right now, and might implement in subtle ways, in non-obvious ways. I think there's a lot of scarcity. I mean, this has been present for years. It's a sort of thinking that resources are really scarce, and that's another fearful attitude, and I get it, but it just doesn't help because more fear piled onto other fear and anxiety just doesn't make for good decision making. So and as a result of the scarcity, people being concerned about any waste that they see, perceived waste of resources, because if people see that resources are really precious, and then you're seen as showing up and just being kind of wasteful or wanton in your approach, I think that will not resonate very well right now. And I think on the surface, most people, if they're showing up and being a reviewer, want to be seen as towing the line, want to be seen as, okay, I'm doing what they want me to. A sort of, you could call it complicity. And that's kind of a negative word, and I don't really mean it to be entirely negative. I mean, there's just sort of a reality. If you're going to save your research and your career right now, I I don't know any way to do that without some sort of complicity. So anyway, and as a result of that, I'm sort of afraid to stick their neck out, tired and overburdened. I think that's a huge thing. I think already academics and researchers were tired and overburdened for many years because it's just we have a culture of being tired and overburdened. And now we add all of the chaos and uncertainty and trying to make things work, throwing everybody into the middle of a class 4 rapid, and saying, okay, not only was your research already hard, but now we're going to just throw all these chaotic waves crashing down on you in the middle of all this, and that just adds to the tiredness and overburdened aspect. One thing I want to say about that, I don't have any other slides. I'm going to mention it now on this point, that one thing I heard from somebody, and I don't even remember who it was. I was listening to a podcast or something, and they said, you know, we've really got to take care of ourselves and realize this is not a sprint. This is a marathon that we're in. And and I thought those were such true words because having created some real health problems for myself a few years ago from just a constant sense of like working too hard and having a lot of like just angst about making things work at that time. I created some real health problems and landed in the emergency room. And it's not good. It's just not good. And if you aren't healthy and in a state of centeredness and well-being, then you're not going to be able to make it through this rapid very well. So when I am running, let's say like that river that I showed you in that previous slide, this one actually, I've run this whole stretch of river in one day before. It was a very long day and it was at relatively low water, but there are a whole series of class 4 rapids at that lower water. It's not class 5, it's class 4, but it's still challenging. And it really is a marathon. It's a long day. So I really, several days before that, focused so much on getting rested and taking care of myself and eating right so that I would be ready, so that I would be physically prepared to do that. And we've got to do that on an ongoing basis if you really want to make it through this, is taking care of yourself. Okay, so that's not the main topic of the talk, but I just thought that that was a really important thing to add because you may be right now like, I don't have time to take care of yourself, but you don't have time to not take care of yourself. You're in the middle of the most difficult period in my lifetime, and I'm approaching 60 soon in a few years. So, right, these are weird times. Okay, I think um, your reviewer probably is motivated for change also. That's the final point, is they want to see positive change because things are so bad right now. So if they see ways in which your research might lead to some kind of positive change, I think they'll be excited about that. And then I just summed up the whole thing. It's a wild up and down ride. I think that's the other thing, is that they may feel resentful one day and then may feel like, oh, things are going in the right direction the next day, and then the next day feel frustrated again or angry or unclear. So it's up and down. It's like, again, running whitewater, where from one minute to the next you never know how you're going to feel. So as a result of some of these emotions and also just thinking about more the mentality of this, not just the emotion of this, they may be thinking, well, this is pretty unusual. And they are probably thinking there are only a small number of grants that will be funded, and it's unpredictable which ones will be funded. So I better be more careful than ever. They are probably thinking I need to not do or say the wrong thing because I don't want to trigger a backlash against my own funding as a result of doing or saying the wrong thing. So I've got to be really careful about that. They might be thinking the situation is ridiculous because, but really, there's nothing they can do about it except for that idea of subtle rebellion, and perhaps doing something on the side that's not directly affiliated with your work. But I think it's careful to sort of separate any outside political activities that you may be taking from your work presence. And again, you know, I'm really torn on that one because I think right now is a time for people to stand up for what they believe in. And if you are dependent on this kind of funding, you got to be careful about how you do that. Okay, so extremely wary of manipulation because so much of what I think many smart people, when we look around, we say, okay, there's this very high degree of manipulation going on. And I think people just in general are sick of it, are really sick of it. So seeing you to be manipulating them in some way in your grant proposal to feel one way or another, I think that will backfire. And I think this is more of a guess, But I believe and I feel that we are headed towards times of much more solidarity amongst affected groups for what is, by what is going on, because solidarity is the way we get through tough times. This has been shown by research over and over again that the best way to get through tough times is with community, not by yourself, despite our sort of glorification in our culture, especially in the United States, of this lone wolf who can go it alone and do everything by themselves. I think people are seeing that that ain't working anymore. And I use bad grammar intentionally. So it just isn't working. And I think there's going to be an increasing trend towards solidarity and feeling like we are together in this. And so I think they will want to see from you this idea that you're not just there going it alone and doing your own thing, but you're part of this scientific community and your work is going to contribute to that community in positive ways. So, how about you? How might you think or feel right now? And I think people shared a little bit of this in the chat. But I think one person actually explicitly shared something like this, that you feel like you have to rush more proposals out the door than ever. And there is a sense of sort of panic behind that. And also, I think the panic and the rushing things out the door is often combined with hesitation, like, well, is it even really going to go anywhere? Is it going to lead to anything? A sort of a deep doubt about the worth of the efforts we're taking. So this is like the worst, panic plus hesitation. And I'm saying this stuff because I've been there over the last couple months. I've experienced all of these things: rushing things, panic, hesitation, being unconfident and waffling, um, feeling well, I haven't done this because I've taught for years to not do this one, but I think many people will feel in the panic and rush and hesitation the need to prove yourself all the more. And one of the predominant ways that people prove themselves is by piling on facts. Now, there's another angle to this also, that piling on facts and just information in your proposal, I realized in working with a client, a client that I've been working with for several years recently had a big breakthrough. And this breakthrough was more of a mindset, a thinking breakthrough rather than a technical breakthrough on grant writing. This particular client realized that he had been obfuscating, subconsciously obfuscating the ideas that he was putting forth in his proposal by making the writing overly complex and kind of covering up the core of what he wanted to do, because he had a deep fear, especially as a junior faculty member. He had this subconscious fear that, well, maybe people aren't going to like my ideas because these are new and different ideas than what the field is doing. And so there was this fear, and the fear led to this habit of covering up what he's actually doing. So it's kind of obscured and kind of unclear, covering that up with lots of facts and data. That was not working for him, and it never works well. And once we got him past that mindset issue, then suddenly his writing became so much more clear. It was like night and day. It was really cool to see that. So anyway, but the fear and anxiety always causes people to do habitual things like piling on data. And then there's this thing that I call grant spam. And I know that's in a way derogatory term. And the reason I use that it's not intentionally derogatory. It's really just saying, none of us like lots of spam email. Nobody likes, as a reviewer, to spend their time on a hastily written proposal that you threw together because you thought you needed to increase your odds by throwing more proposals together. Reviewers just don't like that, especially now. I mean, when they're feeling more burdened, more anxious, more worried, more of all of the stuff I talked about than ever, if you throw something together hastily and make them spend their time on it, they're going to be even more resentful. If they're already feeling resentful about the whole situation and you spam at them, then you're just amplifying the resentment that they may have. and they will take it out on you because that's the only power and control they have in this situation, is to control over whether you get their support or you don't get their support. That's it. So another one is that a lot of people, especially those who may be doing better at this, may feel the temptation to even more show their credentials and their authority, to say, look how awesome I am. And I think there's merit in showing that you are productive, that you will use the resources wisely, but it's a fine line, because if you go over that line and sort of are seen as being too successful right now, as taking too many of the resources for yourself, I think that could be a big danger. That could really backfire in an environment like this. So we don't want to come across as like, I'm unique and I'm special and you should support me because I'm awesome. Like, not during a time where I think people are more inclined towards solidarity than having, one person who's like saying, I'm going to take all of the remaining funding for myself, or a big portion of it. Okay. And this one is a tricky one, that you should submit what you think reviewers want rather than standing up for what you believe. Now, I'll come back to it in a bit, but this is so important because I've been seeing a lot of people who've taken my past trainings where I teach about learning what your reviewers want, and other people who are out teaching grant stuff are also saying that same thing now, because it makes sense. But the big mindset problem I see that comes from that is then you get too much in your reviewer's head and you lose track of your own confidence and excitement and clarity about the ideas that you're bringing. And your reviewer needs that confidence and excitement and clarity first and foremost. It's not that every idea they'll be excited about. So there's a balance there, and we'll come back and talk about that more. But you really do have to stand up for your ideas confidently and clearly. This is an environment where waffling, just increases the uncertainty, and people already have enough of the uncertainty right now. Don't add to their uncertainty with inconfidence or waffling about what you're doing. Um, and I think, we have, as I said, been in a lone wolf trend for many years as a society and in science. Yeah, the NIH and other funders have said you have to be collaborative, but still there were still a lot of support for the lone wolf. And I think that is likely to be changing. Again, that's a guess, but it's a guess based upon history, not just random guesswork. So you may, as a result of some of these fears and worries, rush your writing, dump even more evidence onto the page, take a victimized stance in your writing. Now, this one is subtle, but really damaging to your writing. If you're going into your writing thinking, well, kind of woe is me, this is so unfortunate. I worked so hard. I did all of this awesome work, and now I'm not being appreciated by anybody, and I'm having to beg for funding, and these people probably aren't going to give it to me anyway, and it seems kind of futile. That's a victimized way of thinking. I get it. I understand it. I've been there. I've been in that mode, and it's not going to help you. It just will not help you. If any of that tone whatsoever comes across in your writing, I don't think it's going to play very well at all in the current environment. And it also, if again, thinking about the rapids, if you're in the middle of the rapid and a wave comes and crashes you down, which has happened to me more than once, unexpectedly crashes you down and lands you somewhere you don't want to be at all, you know, feeling victimized about it, like bemoaning the fact that you're where you don't want to be, is the absolute worst thing you can do in that situation. The best thing you can do in that situation is say, oh, this is not where I want to be. How do I get out of it? That is the mindset that will help you get out of it. And conveying that in your grant proposal, that regardless of all the stuff going on, that you are more determined than ever to do positive science that contributes to your field, to your community, will be rewarded certainly more than being victimized. Showing off your authority even more. I talked about that already. Trying to manipulate the reviewers, make them feel sorry for you, or make them feel like you've got something, super special or whatever. Submitting even more proposals. I really don't encourage an excess of proposals unless you can do those with very high quality. If you can do more proposals with high quality, I think that's fine. But for most people, everybody actually that I've ever worked with, there is a trade-off between quality and quantity. As the quantity goes up, the quality goes down. So if we take, actually, I'll make this a pink line. If we make the pink or magenta line here being the quality of proposals and the black line here, the quantity of proposals, there is an inverse proportional relationship. Somewhere in there, there's a sweet spot, but most people are way too far on the quantity side and not on the quality side, in my experience. All right, so then let's talk about treating it like a lottery. Okay, so where the sort of lottery ticket, I've got to get my entry into the lottery, and since it's a lottery, that's what people think. Since it's a lottery, I need to buy more tickets. I need to submit more, have more chances. The key difference that we don't understand, actually, there are two key differences, but I'll talk about one of them, is that in a real lottery, if you go buy a lottery ticket, you're not taking anybody's time who is judging your lottery entry. It's just a whole computerized thing. It's random. It truly is random. In the case of the so-called grant lottery, you are taking real people's time, reviewers' time with your submission. And when you take their time wantonly, treating it just like it's a lottery entry and not treating it as you taking their time away from what they could be otherwise doing, they will be pissed at you. And you don't want them pissed at you right now. This is a mentality that I hate. I've hated it for years. Not that I hate the people doing it, because it's very common to think that way. It's like a common thing in academia. It's just to think, oh, it's like a lottery. Let's do more. But I hate that mode of thinking because it's false. It creates bad side effects. And that's one of them, is angering your reviewers. If they think you've been careless and just throwing your grant proposal together, they will not reward you for that. But it's also that quality still does matter. Yes, there are probabilistic components of whether your grant will get funded or not, whether reviewers are having a bad day or not, whether you got the right reviewers or not so right reviewers. So there are probabilistic elements, but I have seen time and time again that quality still biases the probability of funding heavily in your favor. It's still probability, but wouldn't you like to have that probability biased in your favor? It is not just a lottery. So you've got to focus on the quality. It is so important. And especially now when reviewers are not going to have patience for people who don't put in something that's really quality, that spends their time well as a reviewer. So some of the side effects, I've already been kind of ranting on this a little bit. This may, as a result, confuse your reviewer if you just write hastily and unclearly. If you're unclear about your ideas, that can trigger resentment, especially if you're seen as being very, quote, rich in terms of your funding, and you're not seen as really doing something valuable with your request for funding, something that will really contribute to what your community thinks is important right now. It can trigger worry that, if you're doing something that is not, I'll use the word politically correct in the current environment, maybe we should bring that term back, because it was kind of used against a lot of stuff in the past from one side. Now it's being used by the other side. So if you're not doing something politically correct, I think there's a lot of worry about that. If you're seen as hiding something, if you're not extremely clear, like in the case of the client that I talked about, who was obfuscating what he was really doing in his work by just sort of covering it up with layers of complexity and confusion, that's it never worked well, but it's going to work even less well in this environment. Being seen as weak and ineffective, like people right now we're looking for strength. We're looking for, as people in general, we're like, okay, there's like one small group of people who are seemingly very strong right now and doing things that many of us are like, well, that ain't right. Um, and then everybody else seems like most other people seem like they're kind of cowering in weakness. And I think there's a great craving for strength and clarity, but not just strength as in, I'm so great, look at me, I'm awesome, I'm strong. No, strength is in, I'm here to do something important for we, the community of scientists. My research is going to really contribute, and I am confident that I can make that contribution to, if you support me in funding this work. That's what I mean by strength. We do not want to add to overwhelm and anxiety of the reviewer, but that is the natural result of if you go into this with a lot of anxiety and overwhelm. And I think if you do get right now, especially more than ever, really too much into grant spamming mode, that can tarnish your reputation and your standing. I mean, it always was the case, but I just feel like people's tolerance levels are probably going much lower for that kind of stuff because these are not times to tolerate silly games. These are times to like treat your science and research very seriously and present it, like take the time to put it into a really clear and compelling package and be really clear on what it is. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. So I'll talk about that under the what to do instead part of the talk. And I didn't know if I was going to be behind on the or have enough to talk about because I put this together so quickly as a sort of emergency meeting. And now I'm realizing, as always, I can talk more than I think I can. So I'll try to keep moving here. Okay, so clarity. Let's talk about this keyword clarity, which I think it's always been necessary, but it is even more necessary than the previous necessity. And that is because guess what? Everybody is unclear right now. We're all unclear because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there will be funding tomorrow or not. We don't know if there's going to be a shutdown or this or that or the other thing tomorrow. En masse, people are unclear about what is going on. And this unclarity and uncertainty, it erodes away at us with anxiety. So if you show up with a grant proposal that contributes to that lack of clarity, contributing to that anxiety, contributing to that just like, here's more unclear stuff in my life that I have to deal with and have to figure out, you're not going to win any friends right now. You've got to be extremely clear. And I've had a big transformation in my grant writing work over the last year and a half, my programs and training over the last year and a half. I used to really, like from when I started this, I used to focus on the writing and think it was mostly about the writing. And yeah, there's this part of like actually doing good science at the core of this too. And I would talk about that, but I didn't ever really focus on that. Over the last year and a half, I've really changed everything up to focus first on the thinking at the core of your proposal, to really put together solid science that makes sense in the context of a grant mechanism, but really putting together the very best science. I term that the big idea at the core of your proposal. And doing this has revealed a couple things. One is that when I have worked with people who have had troubles in writing, yes, there are sometimes writing troubles that happen, but the vast majority of people that I've worked with that have had troubles in their grant writing were actually thinking problems about the idea at the core of their proposal. And by really going to work on that, it's been surprising how much that has eased the writing process. That by fixing the thinking underneath and having great big ideas at the core of the proposal, we actually then the writing almost does itself. It's not quite. I mean, there are still some complexities there to do that well, but it is so much easier. And so if you just sit down, some people say writing is thinking, that quote. And I've actually come to kind of hate that quote because there is an element of of that. I mean, when I'm journaling, you know, on my own journal, sure, I'm thinking out loud into the journal. And that is a case where writing is thinking. But when we are in a mode of performance, of writing for the reviewer, I'm just going to write performance here. When we are in a mode of performance writing for somebody else, that is not thinking. That's when our thinking, it doesn't help us develop great big ideas. The only thing that mode of thinking helps us do is try to figure out, well, what's going to be satisfying to this reader, to this reviewer. And that's a fine mode of thinking. But if you do that first, before you develop the really good big idea at the core of your proposal, you are doing yourself and your reviewer a disservice. We really have to develop that clarity about that idea at the core first. And so one of the things that I've been doing in working with people for this, to develop these clear thought models at the core of their proposal. And I have this example that I'm going to talk about first of what I mean by thought model. So this is a famous photograph from biology, one of the most famous photographs in biology. And it's a photograph of the work of Rosalind Franklin as part of Watson and Crick's lab, trying to figure out what is the structure of DNA. So this is an X-ray crystallography image. Now, if you look at this, if any of us were to look at this and not know what the mental model for that structure is, which is a DNA helix, all that you'd see on this is just this patterned series of blobs. That's it. Data is not a model. Data is not a model. And most people that I work with end up conflating or confusing those two things. Data can support a model, but a model is a product of your imagination. It is you thinking about, ooh, I've got a model here that might explain this or might do this thing or might transform the field in some way. That is a mental model, and then you use your data to support it. So the model, in terms of this figure, is the DNA helix, and this figure, the data, just supported that model. We've got to be thinking that way because that's actually, as I've moved into helping clients doing that, it has strengthened their science, strengthened their grant proposals substantially. So another example of models, if you just want to think about what do you mean by thought models? I love the Gedanken experiments from Albert Einstein. You can look them up. There are one or two websites that actually illustrate. There are just people sending signals on a train car to one another, and thinking. And Einstein was using those experiments, those thought experiments, to elaborate the theory of relativity. So the theory of relativity did not come from an equation first. It came from the thinking model first, which later led to the equations. Now, when I was taught relativity, it was very unfortunate that I was taught with the equations first. Just learn this equation and you will understand relativity. And I was like, wait, I was a physics major and I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me, this equation. Like, what, why? And my physics teacher never actually taught those thought models, which was just it's like criminal, I think. And we, as writers of a proposal, can't treat our reviewer and reader in that same way that my physics teacher taught me. If you just throw somebody an equation or a bunch of data without giving them a clear model to have this mental hook of understanding what you're talking about, you are doing them a big disservice and you will not get rewarded for that disservice. So a couple of grant specific ideas of this is one from a proposal that I did that was scored 3.2 percentile on the first round of submission. And if you've been following me for a while, you've probably seen that example before. But anyway, the thought model was mapping all of the possible combinations of post-translational modifications that could potentially be on a protein into a searchable space with this scoring function for how well does the data fit this particular model in this space, to be able to score that and use that score to efficiently search this space. And the challenge here was that the search space is so large, it's not computationally feasible to search that whole space. So we had to come up with a specific algorithm, or use a specific algorithm to effectively search the space. But the algorithm isn't the model. The algorithm is the how we were going to implement this model. But this was the actual model at the core of the proposal. Another example model is using the available encode cell lines to produce proteomic data that will be mapped to the genome and added as annotations to the popular genome browsers. So it's essentially saying, at the time, there were a lot of genome browsers that were popular, and there was no data about where the actual proteins were expressed within those genome browsers. And I thought, oh, what if we could take this proteomic data, actual expressed protein data, and map it directly back to its origin on the genome and display that on the browser along with all the other genetic data. So you could, as you're browsing through and saying, well, where is a gene? You actually have real proteomic data to show you where that gene is. That's that model. The last one I'll show is fixing the problem with inconsistent or unreliable biomarkers by starting from the genome to determine the mechanistic underpinnings of potential biomarkers. And that is the key statement of that proposal. Biomarkers at the time we were doing that proposal, it was very unreliable, and there had been a lot of failures to try to find suitable proteomic biomarkers. And our approach was, let's not just use these statistical approaches that everybody has been using, but let's actually find the origin of this biomarker in the genome so we understand why and when mechanistically this biomarker peak might arise, so that we have a much more predictable system for what these biomarkers mean. Anyway, so those are ideas of several thought models. And your thought model at the core of your proposal has to be clear and concise, such that you could state it in one sentence, and at least you know what you're talking about. Now, these, I've given you more words than just the one sentence on the page because I'm explaining it to an audience outside. But for yourself, it really has to be very concise. And if it's not very concise within one sentence, then you probably don't have a good thought model. So, so I think the thing is that I have seen over this last year and a half, where I have really focused in on helping people develop strong, big ideas and the thought models associated with those. The more I've focused on this, the more I've realized that most people are way too focused on the writing and not focused enough on developing that great big idea that's going to be transformative and useful for your community. So important to do. And this is how you get clarity, because once this is clear for you, and then you bring it into your proposal for others, then you then the writing doesn't matter quite as much. I mean, it still matters, but it doesn't matter as much. You don't have to be so particular about the writing if you have this very clear and compelling idea. So now, for time reasons, I have to keep moving. Making it easy on your reviewer. Okay, with sensitive, anxious reviewers, it's essential to make it easy on them, to not, just don't make it hard for them. Tell an easy, flowing story of this research and of its why it is important. And that is telling a clear and compelling focused story of the research. And I think now more than ever, it has to be clear on how it will benefit the field and community, not just your own personal agenda. And I didn't mean to cross out field. That was not my intention. I meant to underline it, just to make that clear. So complexity is obfuscation, and people don't trust it. And people need to trust more now than ever. With anxiety at all-time highs, people need more trust. So be very clear about how your work will benefit the science and the community. And that goes back to developing your big idea and the model and making sure that what you're pursuing has a really clear benefit to your scientific community that you can argue for. Another thing people are looking for is efficiency and efficacy. So it's really just when resources become much more scarce and limited, people want to make sure that what you do get, that you're using it very efficiently and productively, that you're not just going to sort of waffle around and not take it seriously or play around with like a bunch of sidetracks. They're going to want efficiency and productivity with it. Open-ended stuff is not good in such an environment. And unless there's a specific call for something like genomics work that is more open-ended. But anything else, I don't suggest anything open-ended. I've never supported open-ended research because it's just psychologically, it's harder to hook into for your reviewer. You have to be instead focused on solving concrete and clear problems. Concrete and clear problems that are being faced by your research community, and show that you really have a clear and compelling plan to make it happen. No hand waving. I just think now is not the time for sort of hand waving. Oh, trust me, I've got a great track record, so it'll be awesome. I don't think people are going to buy that nearly as much as maybe they have in the past. So we really need to show that we're going to be efficient and efficacious with our work if funded. Now, authenticity and confidence. I mentioned this earlier. And one of the things is that it's when we develop that big idea that I talked about, it's very common for me to see, especially in younger faculty, to feel unconfident. Like, oh, I developed this thing out of my imagination. I essentially pulled this mental model from thin air, and now I'm putting it down and I'm writing a story about this idea. And there's a lot of temptation to be unconfident about that because it's something that we weren't trained to do. Most of us weren't trained to actually develop mental models and then talk about them and promote them and be criticized about them. It's not really a part of the training, at least not in my experience, and based on clients that I've worked with, it's not. This creates a lot of fear and doubt and concern and worry to just have a clear idea and put it out there. But you have to have that confidence in this environment, but also the authenticity, not being seen as covering up potential mistakes or challenges or glossing things over. So it's this combination of being confident. Yes, I'm determined. I'm going to make this happen, and here's how. That's the confidence piece, and the authenticity piece is being really authentic about, and this is going to be challenging. And here are the challenges that I foresee, and here's how I see making sure that we are safe. If I go back to the whitewater model that I talk about, is when we're running the class 4 and especially the class 5 whitewater, we try to do everything we can to be safe about it. We set up safety throw ropes in case somebody comes out of their boat. We go in a particular order so that the strongest paddler often goes first so they can get through, and then wait in case something happens to one of the other paddlers. And we carefully scout so we know what we're dealing with. So that kind of preparation is key. And I think reviewers will want to see that from you to back up the confidence of this. And just being willing to present a big idea and stand behind it. That confidence is attractive in this kind of environment where everybody else is like unconfident and wondering what to do. So it's not overconfidence, it's not bravado, but just being confident. Like, this is a good idea, and here's why I think it's a good idea, and why I think it will help the community, and how I think we can pull this off. So I think being seen as transformative or in some way substantially improving things will get you big points. But I want to say a little bit more about that there's this weird sweet spot. I came up with this idea of like low risk plus transformative, which almost seems like those are contradictory because as a community scientifically we've treated those as two different things. Like with R21 proposals, the idea is, well, it's potentially transformative, but it's high risk. So high risk, high reward, you know, and low risk, lower reward. That's kind of how a lot of people think. I encourage you as an applicant to think about how you can do better than that and convey both lower risk and higher transformative potential at the same time. How can you do that? And I can't tell you exactly how to do that because that goes back to developing a big idea that's unique for your work and unique for your particular reviewer community, that you can assure them that you have a reasonable shot at success with your plan. And if you are successful, that this really will help in a big way, will help everybody in that community in a big way. So now is the right time for a clear and compelling vision for moving the research forward. I don't have evidence to back this up, but I do have a suspicion that incrementalism is going to die a silent death. I think it's been dying, this sort of incremental approach to doing like little increments of research. But I think in this kind of environment, it's even going to go more by the wayside. So I think the other thing is that you may have to modify your path and do some work that you don't love in order to keep your program afloat. Now, I'm not saying to go completely away from where your own magic powers, your own strengths or superpowers lie. I'm not saying that, but I think there is some room for compromise here to just keep things going, to make sure that you can be standing in a few years or whenever this ends. Um, so, you know, be willing to be flexible, but don't totally lose yourself. Don't go way off track into something that you hate doing because that always backfires no matter what environment. If you're doing work that you really dislike, that you're not going to enjoy, I just do not suggest that. I have never seen that work well for anybody. Yes, you may get some funding for that, but a couple years in, you'll be like, why am I doing this? This is not worth it. And you will get into self-sabotage, which will make future proposals even more difficult. So find problems. This is like, actually, I'm going to circle this in the more permanent digital pen here. Find problems you can solve with your expertise, team, and tools. Find problems in your field, in your community that you can solve with that expertise, team, and tools. Be a problem solver, not just somebody who's like, hey, I have a great idea, wouldn't this be awesome? I think this is exciting and interesting. But be a problem solver. Find problems and actively use your creative juices to find ways to develop models of how you can solve that and go forth with that. And I think that will be much more rewarded than just sort of speculative, curious-based science right now. Another aspect you can bring in is this competitiveness angle. I mean, even in this political environment, helping the US stay competitive, if you are in the US, it's still a thing, at least for some people who aren't totally lost in ideological la la land. So helping the US stay competitive, how does your work help us stay competitive? Because we're going to be having some challenges with that most likely. So how can your work play into that narrative? I think if you have the chance to point that out, that's probably worthwhile, but don't overdo it. Don't overplay that hand either, because then you'll be seen as manipulative if you overplay it. Okay, predictable outcomes. I already mentioned this, but just how can you make sure to really convey predictable, clear outcomes from the work rather than just, hey, we're going to do this work and at the end we'll get some data and then we'll publish it and then it will be out there for everybody to see. I think that, again, that has never been something that I recommended, but especially now, just the idea that you're going to add to the stack of information already out there, I don't think that's going to get much traction in this environment. So we really want to make very clear and predictable outcomes from our grant work. And then a little bit about why rush won't work. Um, okay, so I'm wondering if I have this other figure. Okay, I'll go to this other figure and talk about just this idea briefly. Okay, so this is our process by which we're currently helping clients in our Grant Foundry Accelerator. And we divide it into 4 phases. They are the preparation phase, play phase, planning phase, and performance phase. And we typically spend 4 months with people going through these phases because these phases take time, especially this, what we call the play phase of coming up with a really solid and compelling big idea. That takes time. And there are no shortcuts to that, at least none that I have found, that I have read about, that I have seen. There just aren't shortcuts to that creative process. And no doubt about it, this is a creative process. This is not something about how good your data is. This is not about how good your track record is or anything else. It's how good your imagination is and how clearly you can turn that imagination into something concrete and compelling. That's why we use the term play, because you actually arrive at this big idea more quickly through a playful way of approaching it than a very serious and studious way of approaching it. But most people come into it very serious and studious, and that makes it take even longer. It's not so good. So we've got to be really playful. And so this phase can take sometimes several months for people. We try to accelerate it, but it's difficult. And then also the planning phase, really putting together the outline of the story that you're going to tell about the big idea, that takes time too. And it can't be rushed because we're trying to figure out your reviewer's frame of mind and tell a story that brings them from their frame of thinking about this subject over to where they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense that you would want to do that. I think that would be beneficial. And doing that, it takes work. And so my point is that I see people trying to rush these things, and it always ends up in being not as good of a big idea, or unclear, not as good of a story layering, just not as clear and compelling of a proposal overall. And when I said this process takes 4 months, I'd say that's the minimum. Typically, some people will take 6 months with this, and that's probably about the longest that I've seen, unless there are some real hangups, sometimes people just have, some mindset issues or some hangups, and then it can take even longer. Like if they're switching directions, if they make a decision and then change directions later, that slows it down even more. And so I used to encourage people to iterate on a specific aims page. That was my strategy for getting people ultimately to a high quality proposal. I want to compare that with this current process that I just said could take 4 to 6 months, and you're thinking, oh, that's way too long. Well, the process of getting a great specific aims page through iteration was often 8 months to 10 months to 12 months for most of my clients with regular feedback and interaction. It was longer, and it was longer because we hadn't separated out the process of just developing that big idea first before we tried to really write anything about it. This process takes time if you want quality. There is just, I'm sorry, you can't avoid that. And I know there are people who fight that reality and say, no, I need to do it faster. I want to do it faster. And I'm on the wrong slide. I want to do it faster. I've got deadlines. I've got to get more proposals in. Okay, but understand that if you do that, you are sacrificing quality. And, there is some sweet spot in there, but again, most people way overdo it on the rush side and underdo it on the quality side. Okay. So about AI strategy. Okay, what doesn't work? And I've got to be somewhat brief here, but I'll just give you a big hint since I promised at this, and then maybe I'll do another follow-up that goes more in depth on this. I see a lot of people trying to use AI chat to essentially write a proposal for them. And for less competitive proposals, That can sometimes work if you're very careful about going step by step in your proposal and writing one step at a time with the AI rather than having AI write a big mass of text for you. So what I mean by this is, I mean, it definitely doesn't work to have AI just like write like a whole specific aims page. It's terrible at that unless you have a very clear example that you feed it that's very similar to what you're doing, and then you say, here are the ways I want that example changed. That can work. Okay, but de novo, no, not good. The way that for less competitive proposals you can do this de novo is really go in and saying, okay, well, what's the first component or piece of my proposal, and getting AI chat to write that one piece. Okay, and maybe you have an example of another proposal and you can give it an example of that one piece, and then it will come up with some text for that based upon your query. And then you can do the second piece with another query, and the third piece with another query, and the fourth piece with another query, and then weave them together. And AI can sometimes help you even weave those pieces together. Um, so that's an approach that can work for writing something from scratch. I still think it's not great because you're still relying upon a very limited chat context in terms of telling the AI what to put there, or what should go there. And you have to be extremely clear to make this work about what is the big idea and where are these individual layers headed. And you have to be very directive with AI. I mean, adamantly directive. Like when it comes up with something that is not sort of weaving the story together in the way that you want it, you have to be able to, you have to, say, no, that is not what I wanted. I want this instead, and be very clear, very directive with AI in telling it what to do to get it to step by step lead to that sort of big idea at the core of your proposal, and then lead to the specific aims or um, the objectives of your page. Okay, so that's a way that works, but that's not the full strategy that I'm talking about, because still your AI lacks knowledge of your specific work in that case. So what we've been doing is we've been feeding, when we work with a client, we will feed all of that, all of those conversations and discussions and the mind map that we develop into what's called the GPT, which is a sort of pre-programmed, self-contained chat agent, you could call it, within OpenAI's system that has certain information, documents that, and instructions for how to behave. So we do this per client, and by the way, we have a plan where none of our clients' data is shared. So, don't worry about that. It's a private plan. And so we create this GPT for this client and for our work with this client, where it has all of those conversations, all of those discussions, all of those mind maps in it. And then we use our grant story funnel, and which has a clear specification of all of the different layers that should exist, like on a specific aims page. And we have examples of past successful, a lot of different examples of past successful proposals that follow the grant story funnel that have different layers of wording. So what we will do is, once we've programmed this GPT with all this knowledge, with all these discussions that we've had, we then do this line by line, or section, I should say segment by segment, querying of this AI, saying, okay, I want you to write this piece of this outline we've created. Oh yeah, I skipped a step. I'm sorry. Let me cover that step first and then come back to where I just was. The other thing that we do is, before we sit down to write with AI, is we do develop an outline, a very clear outline according to the grant story funnel. So we already have an outline that we have developed of essentially the idea, the layers of ideas that we will be wanting to present in this proposal. So that's another big step. That's what we do in that preparation step of our process, or sorry, planning step of our process. It's planning the outline of our story. So I'll just put that planning. This is our planning phase. And of course, we've also, before that, developed the big idea. So we're really clear on the outline. We're really clear on the big idea. And then we feed in this outline, piece number one. We're like, okay, we want a piece of writing about this piece of the outline right now. Let me highlight with red. We want this piece. We want you to write this part of the grant story funnel that has this purpose, with this as an example of what that could look like, using the knowledge that you have of our past conversations about this. And when we combine all of that into a query, we can get surprisingly good text coming out, because it's not then using its own space of its own, general knowledge that it's gleaned from the training data, where they hoovered up all of this stuff from the internet and potentially, trounced on people's personal property rights, or intellectual property rights and whatever. You're actually using your own intellectual property, because you're referring your GPT to use your information and your data that you have shared. So in that case, you're using your own information, and you can get great responses to this. And sometimes it's a little bit wordy, and sometimes you have to go back and forth. But typically, we can get a great specific aims page that way in about 2 hours, when it used to take 8 months of iteration. Of course, we have spent 3 to 4 months preparing ourselves for this before we actually sit down and do that 2-hour process. So that is our AI strategy, and it is really powerful. And I think the take-home message for you is, even if you don't have a series of conversations, what else can you put into your GPT to build a database that will help it actually answer these queries with real information about your research, but also keep the language very clear and compelling and simple by having good examples of that, and having a clear idea of what kind of structure you are trying to follow. Those are all how the ways in which this is actually successful. So one way that you might use this is you could discuss your proposal and record those discussions, build a GPT, maybe you put some of your papers in there too, develop your really solid outline and story flow, and of course, I forgot to put on this slide, and of course, be very clear about your big idea and why it is compelling both to you and to this community. And then step by step, combine the example and outline and this GPT to write each part step by step. So that's the short version of what we're doing with AI. And I didn't, when we started out to do this, I didn't know if it would work, but it really has been working well. And we even have some clients doing it on their own now with their work, using the GPTs we built for them to do this. And it's been awesome. So, okay, we're at the point in the conversation where I need to wrap up. So I want to talk about how we can help you implement this. And before I just briefly talk about that, and then I'll take some questions at the end. I added this statement at the bottom at the last moment, because we're in an existential period. If you want your research program to survive, this is existential. I've used the example of a class 5 whitewater rapid. And when I'm in a class 5 whitewater rapid, it's called class 5 because it has one or more existential threats in the rapid, that if you don't avoid the threats, it means you're going to be in big trouble, either injured or something worse. We are in that period right now in research and science. We are in that rapid. It's not time to screw around. And going the ways that I mean by screwing around is going it alone, without help, without serious help and feedback on writing your various best proposals, and especially wasting your time on just trial and error, putting one after another out there and hoping it will stick. It's just, this is not the time for that. You're wasting your time, you're wasting your reviewers' time if you're doing that. Now, I'm not saying that we're the only people that can help you. I think we're, very good at what we do. I will say that. But regardless, I really strongly encourage you to go out and get help in this process, regular help of some kind, especially if you're not really, really good at this already, and that you don't take just the trial and error approach to this. It's just, you don't do that. Like I don't do that in a class 5 rapid. I don't take trial and error. Well, maybe I'll try that route over there. I'm not sure if I'll make it. Maybe I'll run into this big rock at 40 miles per hour and break my legs. And literally, I have run a rapid where there is that risk and where people have literally run themselves into this rock because they're going down this 70-foot slide and they're going about 40 miles per hour when you get to the bottom. And if they miss the line, they hit a rock, and one person did break both legs instantaneously. That's the kind of environment we are in. Don't screw around. However you can do it, get help. Get help from somebody, somewhere, however you can. And I just so strongly encourage that right now, more than ever. Now, if you choose that we are the people that you want to consider getting help from on this, we have the Grant Foundry Accelerator, which basically follows that system that I already showed you. This is basically it. It's simple, and yet it's also complex because each of these steps clients struggle with, and we have spent a lot of time really helping clients get through this with a compelling and clear big idea, a compelling and clear story layering, and finally, compelling and clear aims and the rest of the proposal as well. So we can help with that. And we're happy to explore that with you, whether we think we can help you and whether you think you're interested in our help on a clarity call. We promise we won't waste your time on this. And it's not a sales pitch. It's just learning about you and your research and talking about how we might be able to help you if it seems appropriate for your situation. So you can go there with this to this clarity call invitation and sign up. We only have a few spots on the calendar remaining this week, and then we'll be out for a little bit, and then we'll be back in after that. So if you want to talk to us about it sooner rather than later and get your spot, like, by the way, we're already full for April. We don't have any additional capacity for April. We have a few spots for May, which is perfect timing for a really high quality fall submission. So we only have a couple spots in that program left. We've got actually 20 people already in it, which is technically our capacity, but I decided to step up and create a little bit of extra capacity myself to take on more of the calls than I'm already taking on. So we're opening up a bit of extra capacity. So you'll definitely want to talk to us if you're interested in that. Talk to us sooner rather than later, and to get going on that. And also, a separate thing, it's related, but it's separate, is that on a previous presentation, I talked about this idea of really making clear and strong decisions, and doing that with this combination of intuition and rationality together, and how important that is right now, both for grant writing, like deciding what to pursue, when to pursue it, where to go with your research. There's so many decisions to make. And when you're in a position of uncertainty, as we all are, it's very tempting to, and common to get into overthinking. And I am a real believer that our intuition, our core, like by tuning into that core of who we are, we can really take advantage of that intuition in informing these decisions in a powerful way. And especially if we combine that with understanding what our typical biases are when we make decisions, that we can make much better, clearer, stronger, faster decisions if we combine that intuition with our rationality. And so we have a separate program for that that's core intelligence. At this time, it's so new, I don't even have a separate page for it. So you can just go, if you're interested in that, we can also talk about that on a call. So this link here, the clarity call invitation, is the same link as this one. And then when you get on a call with myself or the other person, Elise, doing calls, then you can just say, hey, I'm actually more interested in this core intelligence thing and the decision making and figuring out how I can make really clear, powerful, and confident decisions in a very uncertain environment. And the side benefit of that work is you really get to much more deeply know who you are at your core. And I think everybody loves that, but often we avoid doing that because it seems like a lot of work and it doesn't seem very fruitful in terms of actual progress on anything. But this is a way to make that into something fruitful. It's both enjoyable and fruitful. So those are ways that you can get help from us. And again, all you do is go to that page, schedule a call. If Gabriel is here and can, by any chance, post this link in the chat, just for anybody who
Yes.
just, yeah, okay, thank you. Awesome. Okay, so with that said, I'm not going to go over this again. And so, oh yeah, one more quick thing about it. If you've taken our classes or programs like Grant Foundry before, this is really different. This is not the same old stuff that we've been doing. I mean, at the time that we did Grant Foundry, we were trying to do the best that we could at the time. But after my own breakthrough and how we can do better a little over a year ago, I think we are doing so much better now. It is really this clear process from start to finish. There's no just endless open-ended iterating or things like that. It really is a process. And if you work through the process, you get a repeatable result every time. You get one-on-one guidance from myself and our other highly trained coach through the whole process. And so it's not just being stuck into a group of people and trying to figure it out. We have regularly scheduled calls and we get on there on the call and then we give you some homework to do. Not extensive homework, but we give you some homework to do for each stage. And you can also talk to us and get feedback in between those calls. And so you're guided through the whole process to get a much more predictable result. And our focus is on helping you develop the very best scientific ideas underlying your proposal. This is something that I have not seen anybody else doing, is really focusing in on, let's make the best scientific ideas first. And I can understand that because there are very few people who are really positioned to do that, to help you do that in the way that we are, because I was a scientist who wrote a lot of grant proposals and had my failures first and then a lot of successes later, and really understand how to put together a clear and compelling idea. Plus, I grew up in an environment of scientists. So anyway, we help you do that, and I think that's the most important thing. But then we also have the systematic process for taking that idea and turning it into that compelling story. So that's my last bit of discussion about that. If you want help from us, I really do encourage getting help somewhere, and I will really treat you well. We'll take you through this process and really help you do each of these with quality.